Tack. Our next question is a video. It's from Fraser Mangle in Yarraville, Victoria.
Why are the Chinese allowed to buy up Australian property? This is inflating the price and sentencing a whole generation to renting. Credit Suisse estimates that 14% of all new homes sold in Melbourne and 18% of all new homes sold in Sydney are going to the Chinese. What benefit is this to Australians?
Lisa Wilkinson, do you want to buy in on that one?
I'm just wondering why our video person only mentioned Chinese when, if you put together Canadians and North Americans, they make up a much greater percentage of the number of overseas foreign investors. So I don't quite know why there's this focus at the moment.
Well, it's probably got something to do with the
Chinese
statistics that he mentioned, which came out in the Australian a short time ago, suggesting that I think 14% of new homes in Sydney are being bought by Chinese buyers.
But I think it's 6
pointed
billion.
out that a higher proportion of people buying, overseas people buying these homes were Canadian.
Exactly.
North American.
Canadian and North American make up much more than the so-called Chinese, which includes Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. But they're all getting clumped together, obviously, because visually...
Well, there's a fair bit of media reporting around this, and I'm wondering if it's actually feeding into the fears that young Australians have that they'll never be able to buy a home and someone's to blame.
It's feeding into both race fears and fears that they won't be able to buy a home. So it's a really easy headline, this one.
Sherry Markson. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to know why Americans are buying Australian property. That's what I want to know. But, you know, it's not a very nice thing to say. I don't think that it's a valid argument. You'll remember, Tony, 20 years ago, Queenslanders were up in arms about Japanese people buying property in Queensland. This is a media stunt to work up a bit of racism amongst Australians.
Well, you're certainly right about the figures, because apparently Chinese buyers spent about $5 billion a year buying property houses, but total housing finance in 2012-13 was $264 billion. So, yes, a small percentage of that is
4%.
Chinese. But it is interesting that it's coming out I'm not saying the Australians are responsible for
a lot of people have been reporting on this in the
Yeah.
past few days in, you know, the Herald and other publications as well. I do think it is the case that foreign nationals are driving up house prices in some suburbs in Sydney and Melbourne. I think we have seen that. And also we know that in some of the new housing developments that are being built, real estate agents are directly marketing the properties in Hong Kong and Beijing so that they can try and get a higher price. I think foreign investment in our country is a good thing and we should welcome it. But it is also the case that it has never been harder for the younger generation to get into the property market. The unemployment figures, the youth unemployment figures are higher than we realise because unemployment is categorised as people looking for work, and there are a lot of young people who've simply given up. I think the figures of between 16 to 24-year-olds for women, about 16% of them aren't in any sort of education, training or employment. And it's not that they don't want to work, they're desperate to, but a lot of companies haven't reopened positions after the GFC and there's just not the jobs available.
Chris Bowen, the Chinese housing issue, it may be just a way of saying it's very hard to get into the housing market, foreigners are to blame.
Housing affordability is a huge issue, and Sherry's right to point to those figures about how hard it is for young people to get into the market, but it's nowhere near as simple. I agree with Lisa and Marcia as to say this is all down to one element. Foreign investment in housing comes predominantly from other countries. Chinese investment is high profile and it tends to be focused at the middle and upper end of the market, not at the lower end of the market where first homeowners and young people are trying to buy in. So we do need to do a lot more about housing affordability, but simply saying let's stop anybody from overseas buying a house in Australia really is not the answer at all.
George Brandis, do you have a view on this?
Well, I'm always uncomfortable with the idea of picking on one racial group and saying, well, they're the problem. But unlike others, going back to our earlier discussion, I wouldn't suggest that your questioner should be dragged off to the Human Rights Commission or the Federal Court under Section 18C because Chinese property investors might have found his question offensive or insulting. And I think that's a very good illustration of the fact that the way to deal...
George, if Chinese property developers now withdraw from public life because the depth of the offence, you might have an argument. Let's move on. Our next question comes